the Andrew Lake Podcast.
Now in collaboration with Acid Quote Tees.
Feel the rhythm now.
Good morning. Can you believe it? I am back in the driver's seat again. This is the Andrew Lake Podcast. Wishing you a beautiful day. New York, America. Actually, I wanted to do a shout out to Washington. I've got 3 friends in Washington. Catalina, Naomi, Lexi. Shout out to you, beautiful people of the US of A and around the world, wherever you're tuning in. Very pleased to be with you. What a beautiful day. Can you believe it? I cannot believe it. I'm still, after all these years, in a state of disbelief. We've got coming up, well, I don't need to delay it anymore. I think I should just hand it over, right? There's no need to put off the inevitable. The quote of the day. Some things are too good to share. Some things are too good not to. It's a 2-part quote, right? It's sort of a play on this thing where I have this image burnt into my brain from when I was a child and we watched that Danny DeVito movie, The Trunchbull, which is about this evil school teacher, right? Well, Matilda, sorry. It's a movie about Matilda. So this gifted child goes to this school and there's this evil Trunchbull teacher. And she's eating chocolate and she licks her fingers and she enjoys the chocolate and she says, yes, much too good for children. And that's sort of this iconic take on this classic phrase that some things are too good to share. And it's been used in advertising. It's been used all over the place. You've heard it before many times. But of course, the other half of that, the thing that is revealed to you when you experience psychedelic consciousness and other realms of absurdity, of cosmic comedy and personal realization and all that good stuff, you realize, you see that, well, some things are too good to share, but some things are too good not to. And it just touches on that thing that it is good, right? It is just so good. So I also wanted to share the story. It's probably about time, from what we've been through, from what we're talking about here in this discussion, for me to tell you the actual origins of acid quote teas. And this is significant because this quote here today, some things are too good to share, some things are too good not to, was one of the original first time acid quotes. So here's the story. I'll give you the backstory. I hope it's okay for me to give you the long story. We're giving the long version because we're not in any hurry, right? Remember, the slower we take it, the deeper we get it. So there's no need to rush. So this was at a time in my life when I had been going to India quite often to study meditation at the Osho International Meditation Resort in Pune. And I discovered many amazing things there, met many amazing, beautiful, and that was a huge part of my life. And I'd been going back and forth between Australia and India quite a few times over the last few years. And I'd come to a crossroads. And I'd come back to Australia for about 2 months, and I'd had a month on meditation retreat where I'd been working and meditating in the Blue Mountains. And I was visiting friends, and I had a week or two up at Byron Bay, which is sort of like the hippie centre of Australia. There's a lot of hippies there, a lot of bikini girls, a lot of surfy dudes. And then I'd done Path of Love, which is an amazing awareness intensive, which I'm involved in many ways, and I've done many times. So I was absolutely juiced, right? Totally juiced on consciousness. continuous breakthroughs, multi-dimensional vision, just absolutely top of the game. And I was at this point in my life where I was like, okay, I've done so much of this world travel and meditation stuff. I need to take a new direction, and it's a new chapter. So it was a crossroads, and I had actually something planned up in Mexico. I had something over there that I had to go and check out. And there was this chance, actually, that I was going to go to Mexico and stay there. Like, I was learning Spanish, and I had packed up my life, right? I had nothing in Australia. I had no place where I was living. I had no job. I had no real ties, and all my worldly possessions were all packed up. And I was psyching myself up to go over there and be there and live there, right? And I wasn't entirely sure that this thing in Mexico was going to work out. I actually suspected that it wasn't. So it was a crossroads, and I needed to work out, what am I going to do with my life? So I had my plane ticket booked, and a few days before I left, I was actually driving down the coast, and I stopped off at Elizabeth Beach, which is a famous nude beach in Australia. And I'd frequented nude beaches in my time, so I was well familiar with what goes on there. I hate to let you down, not much happens at a nude beach. It's quite underwhelming. You won't see what you might imagine you want to see. It's really not so interesting, but it is nice to get the sun on your full body and to swim without the extra layer. So I went to the nude beach, and I realized just 3 days before my trip to Mexico that I had one last stash of acid. One last little secret vase. What do you call it? Flask? What do you call like a little capsule of, like a little bottle of something precious? Not a vase, not a flask. Anyway, you know the word I'm thinking of, but I just can't think of it myself. Anyway, so I dropped acid, and I went down onto the nude beach. I started really early in the morning, before sunrise, because I knew it was going to be a long trip. And I started tripping. I entered into that old friend of mine, which is psychedelic consciousness. And the trip took many turns, right? It took many ups and downs. At times it was epic. At times it was introspective. At times it was existential. At times I was the hero on the verge of a journey. And I could see the crossroads in my life, and I could make peace with them. I could see that there were many options, and I could see that the truth of what was actually going to unfold for me in the next few months was nothing that I could imagine, and that turned out to be true. And at a certain point, the trip took this like absurdist twist where I turned into this sort of guy that was just making funny comments, and I would just say these comments out loud to myself and then burst out laughing, right? And one of them, that could have been the first one, was this thing of, some things are too good to share, right? And it's just like, oh yeah, it's just too good. But then I go, but some things are too good not to share. And it's just like this hit, like, whoa. Okay, so anyway, there's heaps of these phrases coming out of me, right? I'm just like bursting with these things. And I go, I gotta write some of these down. And I scrummage through my bag, and I find like this scrummily piece of paper. It's covered in sand and coconut oil, and I find a pen, and it's just completely so much like, wow, what's going on here? And I scribble it down, thinking that, you know, when you're in an altered state, what you write probably won't make sense at all, and probably you might not even be able to read it at all, right? And expecting not to be able to understand it all, I just wrote this phrase down. Some things are too good to share. Some things are too good not to. And the trip continued, right? And even I remember some whales came by, like these huge whales, like diving out of the water and splashing, and they came really close to the shore and people were really watching. It was quite an event to see them. And it was even quite, I remember it was also very windy, so it was quite a high energy day. And yeah, anyway, the phrases continued, and I kept writing some of them down, and the day went on, and I went into many different realizations, and I had a whole trip which is very beautiful, and there's many things that I learned from that psychedelic consciousness, which of course also is that these states that we go into are very much blurred between the chemically induced and the naturally, what we might call meditatively induced. Because these differences, where we say one's on drugs and one's all natural, actually starts to break down and become more open as you walk this path longer, right? You actually become more available to psychedelic consciousness in your waking state, your normal state, the more of this journey you take. So there were even things in this psychedelic trip with LSD, under the influence of LSD, that were normal. They were things that I recognized as my normal self, right? Now that's quite an out there realization. To realize something that is different or a peak experience or special or opening, that's all beautiful. That's all very important. But to recognize something as normal, that really shows how much I have changed and how much I have grown into my experience of reality. It really is a beautiful reminder. So anyway, the day went on, hours on hours on end. The sun was setting. I was the last person on the beach. And it got into the night a little bit, and I went back to the car, and I was coming down, and I had a nice sleep and camp, and it was the next day. And, you know, the next day came, it was like time to head back to Sydney. I was heading off to Mexico in a couple of days, and I opened up my bag to find the little piece of paper. And I realized it was completely covered in all these little quotes. And when I read them, first of all, I could read them, which was amazing that my handwriting wasn't so bad. But second of all, they made perfect sense, and they still had that absurdist burst, like some things are too good to share, some things are too good not to, right? It was like this burst of absurdist cosmic existential humor within me, right? And that's when I realized, that was the point when I realized, acid consciousness, psychedelic consciousness, this is something that is within us. This is something that is there. We just need to be able to open to it. We just need to be able to have that little kick, right? That little puh, that little here it is. Remember that you've got it within you. Anytime you hear a joke, anytime you see something weird, anytime you remember something from your long lost past that didn't make sense but now does make sense, that is psychedelic consciousness making its way out of you, through you, within you. And all it takes is a little quote, right? All it takes is a little reminder. And that's how I came up with acid quote teas, because I saw these quotes on this bit of paper, and I was like, I gotta put that on a t-shirt. That's gonna look so good walking around putting that on a t-shirt. And the other thing is that once I had the conception and had the realization, so many other quotes from my life then came back to me, and I realized, this is absurdist humor. This is an acid quote. And a new one would come out, right? It was like I was still on the acid trip, right? I mean, I was very much still on the trip, even though it had long worn off. And yeah, it was just like this massive moment for me. And then from there, it was like, okay, so I got to put these on a t-shirt, and I got to get some designs happening. And I thought, well, it would be great if I could just put the quote straight onto the t-shirt. Like, this handwriting is like legible and it captures the rawness, the personality of it, right? Because in handwriting, it does reveal something of the taste of the style, right? I remember last week I went to visit my grandma, and she's 103 now. Very old, amazing woman. And she's so forgetful because she's so old. She was like, well, who are you? You know, what's your name? I forgot your name. Whose son are you? And I was like, I'm your grandson. On your my father was Chris, your son. And she goes, you better write it in my diary. So I wrote it in her diary. She goes, I can't read your handwriting. And this was weird because I realized, when I was a kid, I couldn't read her handwriting because she has this elegant sort of cursive running writing style. And I thought, wow, that's so funny how things have gone full circle. And I mean, she couldn't read it partly because my handwriting is a bit messy on that occasion, and also because her vision's going. But, her faculties are still there. She still has awareness, which is, another story, another interesting story in and of itself, right? Your eyesight's gone, your vision's gone, your memory's gone, but your awareness is still there. That is something very telling of someone of 103 years old. It's telling of awareness in someone of any age, really. So anyway, handwriting has its own personality, it has its own expression, and many of these quotes, these acid quotes, they have their own writing, as in some of them are in capital letters, some of them are in larger shapes, some of them are all more cute style, like when a child's learning to write and they write quite messy and they're very careful and it's a struggle, but it's really cute, right? The different sizes, and you see, wow, that's a childish style. So I did end up, of course, actually founding Acid Quote Tees and putting some of these designs onto the Etsy store, which you can go to. So you can go to etsy.com/Acid Quote Tees, and you'll see these handwritings. And the difference is that when you have a design that's an actual handwriting, you can tell because a font, when it has a letter, that letter is the same all the time. But when you have handwriting, the letter is different, slightly different each time, right? So when I draw an E, it's the same style every time, but it is different every time. You can see that there's a difference. But if it's a font, if you get something off a computer or it's artificially generated, then that's when you see, well, that's a font, right? So that's the difference. And that's how I wanted to keep Acid Quote Tees. I wanted to make it purposeful. I wanted to make it soulful. Not purposeful. Well, it is, I guess, purposeful, but personal is what I'm trying to say. I wanted to make it personal. I wanted to make it soulful. I wanted to capture that moment on the nude beach of being in this state of psychedelic consciousness and writing these things down, these absurd statements, these absurd insights. They're sort of like jokes, but they're also sort of like insights. And some of them are heavy, some of them are profound, but some of them are, like this one, just so funny, right? Like, some things are too good to share. Some things are too good not to. That's the quote of the day. I hope you're having a beautiful day. I hope you're having a good day. I hope you can share it with someone. And I might also mention, just because of this quote, you can share your favorite episode with a friend of the Andrew Lake podcast. Spread it around. If you find it interesting, you find you can do something small to support me, we're only small time here, right? We're not big time. So share it with a friend, because some things are too good not to share. Okay, thank you very much for that. We're going to wrap it up here. Have a beautiful day. Stay safe. Keep it real. Take care of yourself. Feel the love. Continue this journey into life, into beauty. And we'll be back very soon. Sending love. See ya.